Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad everyone's back with us for the third session of our June plenary meetings. Today we have two topics on the agenda. We're continuing with our discussions on less complex entity standard proposal, and then we'll turn to fraud afterwards. So we have about a split of an hour for one and then 2 hours to follow. Obviously, if we gain some time, we'll take it and devote it to fraud, and we'll take as long as we need. So we're ready to go. We had another section to deal with in terms of appendices on this proposed standard, and then we have a few conforming amendments to discuss as well. So Kai, over to you.
Thank you, Tom. And it's good to see that everyone is back and that we didn't exhaust them too much with a long marathon day of LCE yesterday. So as you said, today we will try to wrap up the rest of the pieces that we weren't able to finalize yesterday, and also give you a bit of an overview of what's coming the rest of the week. So if we go to the next slide, we dive just straight into the remaining parts. Yesterday we went through the standard through part 9, so now we have the appendices left. So we are going to open for comments on appendices. Mindful there also the first appendix is definitions, and we did receive some comments yesterday saying that there might be some terms that we need to add to the supplement 1, and we've done an exercise and have identified areas that there are defined terms in the ISAs but are not in the glossary that we need to add to our list. So we will add that in to our supplement 1 as well. And then other than that, I think also, as mentioned yesterday in the auditor's report, we need to add the other matter paragraph. No, other information paragraph. I think that's it. So I can hand back to Tom for comments on the appendices.
Okay, we'll take comments on the appendices. Okay, LCE is done. Next. Now, this can't be the case, but we'd be happy. I know a lot of people have commented offline on this.
Good evening, everybody. Hi, Tom. No, just to confirm that I don't have any further comments, because the comments that I had, Kai already addressed in his opening remarks.
Great. Okay, that's proactive leadership from the task force.
Should we then?
I see no more hands, so I assume that not that people are confirming support for everything, but that your comments and the task force actions as a result of the input received is sufficient to progress the appendices further.
Yeah, I don't think there weren't too many other there weren't really any other comments than most on those two topics anyway, so there might be a few. But then going on to the next slide might go equally fast. I think as we intro the different parts yesterday, we said that if you had any significant or fatal comments relating to requirements that needed to be brought back, that hopefully you would raise them when we went through the different parts. But and I think the intention is that based on the updated standard for the ED, we'll update the mapping documents, and that they will be available through a link so that the people looking at the exposure draft could get to the mapping documents, so that they can, if they want to, can look in detail into that. So if there are any specific comments on the mapping that have not been raised, so opening for that. back to you, Tom, for comments on the mapping.
Diane?
Yeah, I just have one comment, and it's a suggestion. So in the mapping document, when things were not brought over to the LCE, there was an explanation, and occasionally the explanation was that it would be very rare that you would have this. And I just caution that because if it is rare, I hope we have some empirical evidence to indicate it is rare. I just want to just pause on those in particular, because I know sometimes when I read through those and I thought about my own experience, I'm not sure some of them were always rare. So I just would be cautious, because if it is going to be available for the public, just challenge when we decided not to bring them over. You had talked about yesterday, if it was related to a listed entity, if it was something that was overly complex, those are perfectly fine. But I think just in terms of using the explanation of rare or infrequent, we should just make sure that that is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on the mapping document? Okay, it's not for lack of interest, as Kai, you stated. People referred to them throughout the discussions on all the parts of this proposed standard. Okay, Kai, back to you.
Thank you. So then we can go to the next slide. I think yesterday a question was also raised how to address the 800 series in the standard. It is related to the next issue that we'll talk about, which is the preface to the IAASB standards as well, where this comment was put in by at least one person. And I think we also went back, and I think when we did start this project, what we agreed on was to focus on audits of financial statements and not widen the scope. So that's why we didn't include the 800 series at that point. We have focused all the efforts on developing the standards for audit of financial statements. I think it is something that we can add or flag in the EM, but I don't think this is the time for adding additional content or widening what would be covered by this standard. So the suggestion from the task force is to stay with what we agreed on earlier, that the standard for now will deal with audits of financial statements, and that we will not include 800 series in the standard, but that is something that will be explained in the explanatory memorandum as well. I think then we can go to the next slide, which is then for the conforming amendments to the preface of the IAASB standards. I think there multiple people have highlighted, and I think some of you already alluded to it yesterday. I think we were a bit eager in putting the new paragraph 6 in and indicating that the ISFRLE is to be applied, which may be a bit hard. So I think there will be a change there to may be applied, so that it's not that you have to apply it for ISAs or have to apply the standard for audits of financial statements of less complex entities, but you can. It's as we agreed earlier, it's an alternative to using the ISAs. We will update the document, and we will update and distribute the revised agenda later on, and will be up for approval then also on Wednesday next week. So I think with that, we can open for comments on the conforming amendments.
Okay, conforming amendment. Josephine.
I wondered if the board wanted to hear my story about the acronym again. Just curious. Thank you very much. I thought that was a good spot on paragraph 6. I must admit I didn't pick that up. So kudos to the person who did. The only thing I just want to say is that I don't know if I managed to make this point yesterday or not. So apologies if I had. What is 15 and 16 in my document? So when we talk about other international standards and the fact that they may obtain objectives, requirements, application to, etc., we may need to rejig those paragraphs, because obviously the standard doesn't include any of those. And I recognize they do say may and some, but in fact, nearly all of those standards include all of those things. So I think we just need to be a bit better or a bit careful about how we include our description of those different types of criteria under this standard. That's all. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, Kai, back to you.
Thank you. We'll look at your comment there, Josephine, to see that we're actually saying this the right thing, and if possible, the update if that's needed. I think then we can move on to the next slide, which is telling us what is coming. I think what we agreed on earlier and what we said to you is that we will have an updated standard by Friday this week, or on Friday. Or a bit prior to that, you will tonight get the revised authority and an outline of the explanatory memorandum, which we intend then to discuss in tomorrow's session. The outline of the explanatory memorandum, I think, as we discussed yesterday, is we seem to be important to get the input needed, and that we will give you an idea of what's included, and then we'll have a discussion on that. Also, tomorrow we'll go through the revised authority based on discussions we had yesterday and the comments received. As I said, yeah, the revised draft standard will be available on Friday. As communicated earlier, you have the ability to spend Sunday with us, and you can book a consultation session. You have until 2 p.m. on Friday to book a consultation session if needed. Also, we will provide the explanatory memorandum to the board so that you can provide comment on that. As you see from the timeline here, that's the intention is that you will get that on July 6th, and that you will have some time to get back to that, and we will ask for comments to be back by July 14th so that we can get it out by Friday 23rd if things go as we plan. So tonight you'll get the authority and explanatory memorandum, which we'll discuss and go through tomorrow. Friday you'll get an updated standard. May or may not want to spend the Sunday with us, and then on Tuesday we will post on the morning on Tuesday we'll post the final standard if there is any comments that have come through based on the standard that was provided on Friday. Wednesday session will be used for the vote of approval, and as I said, then get the EM you will get them by July 6th, providing comments by 14th, and hopefully we'll be able to publish everything by the week of in the week of Friday 23rd. Hopefully earlier than the Friday, but we'll see as early as we can get it through. So that's where we will plan to go next. I think if we go to the next slide, in tomorrow's session, we will also provide you with an overview of the outreach to be performed, so we can have a quick discussion on that. The auditor reporting supplement that we have promised to give you earlier, when we saw the comments that came through on parts 8 and 9 with the asks of things to be brought back, we saw that it needed some additional work. So we are updating that based on what we're seeing, and we will provide you that as quickly as possible. It's not intended to have a discussion specifically, but you will then be able to provide comments on that, written comments. Consultation period, as we said, the vote will be on the consultation period. As we said earlier, it's planned to get out by latest July 23rd. and intention as described in the document or in the issues paper is that it will be open until the end of January, so January 23rd, 2022, which gives a bit more than 160 days or 6 months. That will also give a time for translation and outreach, as we discussed earlier, and we'll go a little bit more into. Yeah, so I think that's basically what we wanted to get through tonight. So if there's any comments specific or any comments to what we have presented now.
I also saw Billy's hand was up a moment ago. Billy, do you have anything to add?
Yes, just two things, Tom. The one is that when we provide the turn standard on Friday morning, obviously the board members all have an opportunity to book a consultation session on Sunday. But apart from that, what we plan to do from the task force's point of view is that at 4 p.m. on Sunday afternoon, we're going to have a debrief session on any feedback that came through the consultation sessions. But I do appreciate that not all members may feel the need to actually book a consultation session. So if you have any additional comments on the turn standard that you will receive on Friday morning, we would also want those comments by Sunday afternoon, 4 p.m. We will put all of this in the email on Friday as well. But we do ask that at that stage, it's really fatal flaw comments. I think Thomas indicated yesterday that we've received a record number of comments, and we can only go through that exercise once. So, but obviously, any fatal flaw comments between Friday and Sunday, definitely. But maybe if we can just resist to do any further editorials and wordsmithing at that stage, that will assist us greatly to get to a turn standard on. The final standard on Tuesday morning. And then just a last comment on what Kai referred to. So we do intend to actually have the comment period open until January 31st. So it's just a little bit longer than 6 months, but we thought that it would probably make sense just in terms of considering the December-January period, that we can just as well make the comment period until January 31st. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Billy.
Yes, thank you. And Willy, that's most helpful. And thank you very much indeed for that. Just to clarify, the Friday standard that we're going to get, is that going to be in track changes? Because that would be most helpful. Okay. Thank you.
It will definitely. Yeah.
Great.
You probably could do it both at track and at clean. I'm sure it'll be both. Okay, Josephine?
I'm ever so sorry. I think I missed it. I am particularly deaf today. I don't know why. I thought we were going to see a revised version of the preface and the authority. Yeah, okay, Bev's before that. Perfect. Thanks, Bev. Just want to make sure I know what I'm waiting for. Thank you.
Not deaf. Thanks, Bev, for clarifying that. Eric?
Yes, I'd just like clarification about the auditor reporting supplement that's coming out tomorrow and what we are being asked to think about with regard to that. I just missed that in the presentation.
Or maybe I'll come in here just to clarify what's coming when. So tonight you'll get two things. You'll get the revised authority and track changes, which we'll discuss tomorrow. And you'll get an outline of the explanatory memorandum, which we'll walk through tomorrow for any initial reactions, just so that you can see what's in there and we can have an initial discussion on that. The auditor reporting supplements and the supplements on the authority will come over the weekend. Those will leave open past the board meeting. You can come back with changes on those particular documents because they don't need to be approved as such. Obviously, we do need the board's agreement on those documents. They're non-authoritative. And then on Friday, there'll be the actual standard and the revised agenda item 2D, which is the conforming amendments, which are the ones that are for approval that will come on Friday, and then any fatal flaws on those two documents by Sunday. We'll send out a revised version if we need to on on Tuesday, and then that is what will be approved.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Eric? Okay, great. Okay, any other questions on the LCE draft standard or our way forward? Any other observations? Michael, anything you'd like to add from a PIOB perspective?
No, I think the discussions have been quite useful. Good points that have been made along the way for the task force to consider. And looks like there's lots of work ahead over the next few days for both the task force and the board. So wish everybody good rest when they get a chance to sleep.
Thank you. Okay, I think that's it for LCE for the moment. I think we're ready to turn to the issue of fraud. Lynn, are you ready to lead us through this discussion? Okay.
Yes.
Great. We're running a little ahead of schedule, but I won't begrudge that. Lynn, over to you.
Thank you, Tom, and hello everybody, and welcome to this session on fraud. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the work done by the Fraud Working Group, which includes Len, Julie, Diane, Fabian, and the IAASB staff, Angela, Hankin, and Bev. And I'd particularly like to note the staff and Bev, who has done the heavy lifting with both LCEs and fraud for this meeting. Next slide, please. Usually we talk about next steps at the end of a presentation. I'm going to change that just so to centre us on where we're at and where we're going. You'll remember that in April, we presented you in the April call with all of the feedback we heard from the discussion paper. And so that was a comprehensive view of all feedback. It included the round tables, it included research, and it included other information that the staff had identified. We also went through the specific topics that were clear that we needed to do something about. Think 315, think technology. We also put before the board for their decision those specific topics that were had mixed or very few comments on them, and said we would bring those back to you, and the board agreed with that approach. So this meeting and these 2 hours are to talk about 6 of those specific topics. It builds on the work we did in April, and it will flow to the work we do in July, where we have 4 more specific topics. And as well as that, we will present to you the Pacific public interest issues and a broad scoping of the project and potential other activities. And all of that is leading us to putting in front of the board at the September meeting a project proposal. So that's the where we are now and in the context of where we're going. Next slide, please. Since the April meeting, the working group has met to discuss the topics that are being considered at this meeting and the possible actions forward. And our deliberations and considerations are set out in agenda paper 3. The discussion today has the objective of dealing, as I've already said, with 6 items, and I will go briefly introduce each item and then open it for discussion. Next slide, please. So the first area for discussion is the introductory language in ISA 240. This was a difficult area, but the working group felt it was important to take actions due to the strong encouragement from monitoring group respondents, but also thought it was critical to consider possible unintended consequences of making changes in this area. On balance, the working group believes that clarification of the introduction is necessary, but has limited the proposed changes. The working group, in considering these changes, will consider what has happened internationally, in particular the recently approved and issued UK standard that clarifies that although the inherent limitations exist, the auditor is required to undertake the necessary procedures in relation to fraud. We will consider whether such changes could be feasible and address those to be addressed in the global context. So we are suggesting some standard setting here, and we are also suggesting that potentially there is a role in education as well. Next slide, please. So with that, we are interested in your comments, firstly on our analysis and our proposal, and secondly, if you think we've missed anything in this area. If we can go back to the previous slide, please. I think it's easier for people to see. Okay, so Tom, back to you for the first round of discussion.
Okay. I'm going to open it up for a comment. Josephine.
Thank you. Evening, Lynn, and super thanks to you, Bev, and the task force, and Angela and Hankin as well. Absolutely great work here. Amazing how quickly you've turned all this around. So really, really appreciate that. In terms of possible action 1, unsurprisingly, I do support exploration in respect of 1A, B, and C. I do think that reordering the paragraphs without actually thinking about changes is just a matter of optics. So further exploration of changes there is welcome. I'm slightly concerned that, well, not concerned, but I wonder if you might also reconsider exploring potential changes to paragraph 6. In the UK, you'll see in the revised standard, we only made a few tweaks, which we felt actually just reduced some of that ambiguity that we're talking around in this paper, but it didn't in any way increase or extend the auditor's responsibility with regard to fraud. So perhaps maybe a bit more open-minded on that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Kaiue.
Good evening, Tom. Thank you very much. I have a general comment at the very beginning. I believe that the overall approach can be improved. Possible actions are not analyzed in terms of their potential to reduce the expectations gap, which needs to be the objective of any actions taken. The key message in this respect is that the entire financial reporting ecosystem needs to be strengthened. In addition, the analysis of the possible actions for auditing standards outside of reporting does not always appear to address the degree to which the proposed action will lead to improved auditor performance in terms of greater assurance compared to the relative cost of the measures being proposed. Ultimately, I hope that the work being done on root cause analysis will help shed further light on what might work and what may be less helpful. This is my general comment. Thanks.
Thank you. Roger?
Thank you, and thank you to the task force and Lynn. A great turnaround on the document. Look, I support the comments of both Josephine and Kaiui. I encourage exploration of this. I think possibly a reordering is cosmetic, but there may be basis coming through, so I'm happy to see that. I do think the emphasis is on the financial reporting ecosystem. I understand we just have to keep on putting it within the context of the auditor's roles and responsibilities within that broader context and keep on emphasising that. So I would certainly encourage that in the exploration as to how we can best participate as a board in those discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. Chun-Wei?
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Lynn, for the introductory comments and the very the great paper. I think it's very enjoyable to read, actually. So thanks for that. I agree with colleagues who have come before me. So just to build on what they've said, I agree with the proposed approach that the working group has put forward in the paper. And on top of that, I'm just wondering if we want to also explore building on and emphasizing on the current paragraph 8 in the extent. At present, it's discussed briefly how the auditors are expected to respond to the risk of material misstatement due to fraud. And I think some of the language used by, for example, FRC around how the auditor's responsibilities are not diminished as a result of the inherent limitations, and what we have in A54 in ISA 200 around how inherent limitations are not a justification for auditors to be satisfied with less than persuasive audit evidence. I think just building on those language, it will, you continue to allow the inherent limitations to be described properly, which I think remains important to considering the knowledge gap element, the audit expectation gap. And yet you are clear that the inherent risks are not excuses for doing a less than robust piece of audit work. So just to encourage us to look at that paragraph as well, and definitely agree with reviewing the response to the UK FRC consultation and to monitor the implementation of the UK version of the solution to see how effective they are in addressing the challenges as well. So thanks for that.
Okay, thank you. Wendy.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Lynn, and your group and the staff. I echo the sentiments, as everybody has said, for A and B, and I just want to talk a little bit about C, because I do think education is quite important. I know that came through in a lot of the respondents, and I think that in general, the paper is very responsive to the respondents. But I'm thinking about the reasons for fraud. We all know are the ineffective internal controls, the culture, many different things that contribute to fraud. And I'm wondering if there's a way the IAASB can educate and work with others and regulators in terms of emphasizing that management goes first. Management needs to be responsible for internal controls and assert that overtly. I'm sure everybody knows them from the US, so we're used to that. And actually, in the PCAOB standards, there's the requirement under certain circumstances to actually opine on the internal controls. But I'm mostly focused in the education area on management and their assertions and the importance of internal controls. Thanks.
Thank you. Imran?
Thank you very much, and good evening. I wanted to say that of all of the topics that we're going to be discussing within agenda item 3, this is probably the one that's the most important and sets the tone for the other topics. And in my reading of the discussion paper, and in my reading of the comments as they're captured in this response paper, there is really a fundamental opportunity for us here to be driving change. However, the way I read the conclusions being put forward is that after a year of deliberations and outreach on the topic, our board is putting forward a proposal that we should reorder paragraphs and that we should be looking at changing some words in the application material. And I think that that isn't responsive in any way to what I read as being put forward by respondents. I don't think that reordering paragraphs changes the fundamental issues regarding auditor responsibilities relating to fraud. And I don't think any number of words inserted into application material is going to raise the bar either in this area. I'm worried that the board's thinking in this area is not keeping pace with what we've heard in the DP and certainly what we're seeing in the marketplace and what we're reading every day in the press around the world. So what's being put forward here is a very, very low bar. And there's nothing to disagree with changing the order of paragraphs and fiddling with application material, but we're missing the fundamental opportunity to drive change here. So I'd like to really strongly encourage far more consideration of what we heard on the consultation, what's happening around the world, and what tools we have for us to respond. Otherwise, what are we saying to the marketplace? We're saying to the marketplace that the IAASB is saying to you that we don't think we're capable of addressing the inherent limitations. And we have to ask ourselves if that's a satisfactory answer. We've said it in almost that many words. And if I had to say that to those who oversee me in my country, they're going to say, well, if you're not capable of doing that, then who? What tool are we going to use to address the inherent limitations in a financial statement audit? This is where this fundamental question is being asked of us and being answered. So I really think that, being true in advertising what we plan to do in this project proposal is vital. If we plan to put together a project proposal that suggests we're going to reorder paragraphs, then really is that the best value of standard setting time in this area? So really appeal to the working group to reflect more carefully on what we heard. We capture at a high level in paragraph 9 and 10 some of the comments. Let's look at the tone of the letters that we've received in this area and what it is that those monitoring group and other respondents are asking us to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Imran. I'll touch on some of the themes that you raised when I make my remarks at the end too. Sue.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Lynn, and to the team. I think the first question was about the summary of the responses, and that seems very reflective of the kind of responses that are there. I think probably consistent with some others. In relation to the first action, I have reservations about whether reordering the introductory paragraphs is fully responsive to the feedback, and in particular whether it will drive any changes in behaviour. You referenced global developments, Lynn, and I think while there is activity in the UK, there is activity also elsewhere, and I really encourage the team to look at what's happening and what has happened elsewhere, and whether there are learnings from other environments that we can draw on as well. And then in relation to the education, very supportive of the education. I think in some of the responses, there were references to the ecosystem, and I would kind of encourage thinking about education perhaps in a collaborative way with other elements of the ecosystem, so that we can draw out not just the auditor responsibilities, but the respective responsibilities around fraud. Thank you.
Thank you. I see, Caio, you'd like to come back in?
Yeah, that's right, Tom, because I have forgotten to give my comment to the possible action one. That's the reason. Thanks very much to have me again. I have a comment to little a. I agree that the paragraphs can be reordered as long as this does not lead to the impression that the inherent limitations of an audit in relation to fraud are less than conveyed previously. By definition, inherent limitations of an audit are inherent. That is, they cannot be eliminated or reduced, and they are real, which is why it is in the public interest that they continue to have a prominent place in the standard. It is unclear what more can and needs to be done to further clarify auditor responsibilities in a general way. With the two other here, little b and c, I agree in both cases. Thanks.
Thank you. Ada.
Yes, thank you, Tom, and Lynn and the task for the working group. Sorry. Thank you for helping us along the way. I don't have much or any new stuff. I of course appreciate that you're coming to us with specific issues, and others have raised the point as well of this being seen in the broader ecosystem context. So I won't raise that any further. In respect of reordering, I think that feels largely cosmetic. I'm probably more in the camp that we may need some further emphasis on the responsibilities of the auditors, regardless of the inherent limitations. And I didn't recall much from the respondents' comments in respect of ISO 200, but I'm fine with some increased linkage there as well. But but my key point is primarily on I don't think that switching two paragraphs around is going to make much happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Kai Martin.
Thank you, and thank you, Lynn, and the working group and the staff that's done a great job on this, pulling together and representing the comments that I received. I think I also can say thanks to Ido that just went in front of me with more or less the exact same comment. My comment relates mostly to A as well. I don't think the reordering may satisfy the need of what we need to do here, and we may need to look into enhancing the responsibilities more, which you already have there. So, but that is where I think we should spend the focus. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sachiko.
First of all, thank you very much, Lee, and your task force. Tremendous job. With regard to the A, I recognize that just reordering the introductory paragraph does not help eliminate all the expectation gap. But I think introductory paragraph of ISO 240 is very important because that is a very good summary to provide explanation about what is the auditor's responsibility to the users and to the public. So I think a clarification of the introductory paragraph is in some way very important. So I support not only just reordering, but to explore possible enhancement to clarify the auditor's responsibility in the introductory paragraph into 40. And also, I think the revised description should clarify the responsibility of each participant in the financial reporting ecosystem and emphasize for each to take their responsibility in balanced manner. In this way, I think it will clarify what is the auditor's responsibility in concise manner to the public, and also to avoid a description that may sound an excuse for evasion. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric.
Thanks very much, Tom, and thanks to Lynn and team for an excellent paper, very easy to read and well laid out and easy to follow. I think my views would be if we are not, I think Sachiko's suggestion around clarifying in the introductory paragraphs the role of each party in the ecosystem may resonated very strongly with me. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think if our work on the introductory paragraphs is focused only on the auditor's responsibilities, I don't, as others have said, I don't think that's going to enhance value in any particular way. And I'm also very supportive of the comments that Sue made, that the education piece in C, which is talking, seems to be focused on the role and responsibilities of the auditor. I think it really needs to be broadened to talk about the role of all the parties in the ecosystem, and that we need to work with other organizations around that concept, so that it's not a discussion that focuses always on the auditor's role, but also the role of others and how they all fit together. Thank you.
Okay. Fernando?
Thank you, Lynn. I also express my support for the recommendations on letter B and C, and I share the comments that others have expressed in terms of the actions for letter A. Thank you.
Okay. Josephine, are you coming in on a particular point, or should I wanted to comment some of my impressions on this section. I have to say that I think Imran has made a really important point on the tone that we've set as a board in this area. And, you know, if you're coming as a policymaker who looks at the standard itself, you read a lot of inherent limitations. And I think one of the positive things that the UK has done is put things in more positive light. I'm not saying that we have to adopt the UK FRC's proposal, but I think more than reordering is an absolute essential consideration for us as a board at a time when this is a major public interest issue. And I that we really need to focus on that. And I'm glad that the working group is considering that as an option. In addition to the proposal that's in the paper, also some further clarification, as Josephine alluded to, that the UK has set. I get the ecosystem remark. I just want us to be very careful to focus on things that are directly in our control, and that our standards are meant to focus on. So, you know, I'm all for, again, reminding people of who does what and how, and what limitations we have. But when it comes to our actions are write-in standards as it relates to auditor requirements and providing detail towards it. So I just want us to be careful that we don't give the false impression, because I think we're willing to act in this area, that it's for others to do the work when there's work that we want to do and there's positive work we can do around clarity, and we are well positioned to do it. And so I just, again, look for a more broad interpretation of what actions we will take on these introductory paragraphs, considering the approach the FRC is, and being slightly cautious on some of the ecosystem matters. Josephine, you wanted to come in?
Thank you, Tom. You took the wind out of my sails somewhat towards the end there. I was just coming back to Eric and Sachiko's point, where there was a suggestion that we might want to explore the responsibility of management and the responsibility of auditor. But as you say, I am slightly worried about that. I feel that ISA 240 already, and again, I understand it is exploring, but I feel it already makes it very clear where the responsibility lies. But to your point, this is about the auditor's responsibility. That's what the standard is about. And that's what we're trying to look to improve and enhance. So I was just a bit cautious about that particular point. Thank you for letting me come back in. Thanks.
Thank you. Michael?
Yes, I don't have much new to say, but I'd like to say that Imran sort of took the words out of my mouth. You know, in reading the paper, you get the impression that the orientation in reducing the expectations gap is toward lowering expectations and not toward strengthening what the auditor is doing and how they report what they're doing. And so you know, I really encourage the board to focus on things that can be done. Educational efforts certainly are appreciated, but I think stakeholders are looking toward the auditors to do more. And so if you can find practical ways to do more, I would encourage that you pursue those.
Okay, any other comments? Anyone? Reactions? I think largely agreeing. It's a question of tone, positioning ourselves, and the emphasis on standard setting, where some of us just have, I think we're largely in agreement, but I think some would focus a little bit more on the ecosystem than others. But I turn it back to Lynn.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you all for those comments. Let me summarise what I heard, and then I'd like to bring Bev in to talk about the ecosystem. In terms of possible action 1A, I heard a lot of emphasis on the second half of that paragraph to explore potential enhancements and not to over-egg reordering of the introductory paragraphs. I also heard some cautions in terms of not losing the inherent limitations and not expanding the scope. So I think if I was rewriting this, I'd flip A and have the second part of the sentence first, because the working group accepts that the reordering the introductory paragraphs would not be enough in themselves if we're going to strengthen the importance of the auditor doing work in this area. Secondly, I heard a lot of support for us looking at what other countries are doing in this area, not only what they've written, but also how well it is implemented and what impact it has. And I also heard support for C on education, and particularly in internal controls, and particularly our place within the ecosystem, which is my segue to handing to Bev to talk about the ecosystem.
Thanks, Lynn. I thought I would just fill you in. We have started to do some work in this area based on the last board conversation that we had, recognizing that it's not just a standards issue. And I think what we heard loud and clear in the responses to the discussion paper is that there's lots of different parties that need to play a role. Obviously, we have our role to play, and that's what the project proposal will focus on, but there will be a piece of it about what we can do, which is limited. So we have started some discussions with both IFAC. So we had a discussion last week and Kevin Dancy was there to talk about fraud and what we've heard and what the role of others is. And they're going to go away and think about what they can do in this area as well. They have public policy statements that they issue. They have webinars and conferences and those kinds of things. So they will think a little bit more about that. Potentially, and obviously just depending on timing, Kevin may attend this session at the July board meeting. I'm sorry, I'm getting confused with months, at the July board meeting, so that he can maybe just fill us in a little bit more about any sort of thoughts that they may have in the area, and then also just hear about the expectations of what we may have. We've also started to speak to Helen Partridge, who's the director at IFAC, and she's responsible for the accountancy panel. Which has sort of taken over that education piece, and she said it's actually very timely that we've started speaking to her. They're busy working with ethics on some sort of guidance on or some non-authoritative pieces around their role and mindset, which fits quite nicely in with some of the things we may want to do in relation to fraud and professional skepticism. So we'll talk some more. And she had some other ideas that she wanted to go away and explore. So again, it's for others to do, but I think we need to sort of take the issues that we've heard to these others so that they can also start to work in this area. So we will come back in July a little bit about what we have heard and what others may be doing in this area. I think with that, Lynn, I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bev. That was a useful update. Tom, is there any other comments or should I move on?
Move on. I don't see any other hands. Does anyone feel like they want to add anything to action 1? I don't see any hands.
Okay, thank you. The next topic is forensic specialists. And this is an area where there are significant...
Sorry. Imran, you raised your hand. Did you want to come back in on action 1?
I'm sorry, Tom, that was a little bit late. But perhaps it's relevant to the topic that we're getting to. I really wanted to reflect on this conversation we've just had and the lenses through which we see this, and to reflect on what people have said to us in their letters. I worry that we talk very much about what our views are about this, but need to extract more of the detail of what's come through in letters, particularly because many people provide us with detailed introductory comments on the letters and not specifically on these questions. So there is, within the IOSCO letter, a call to the IAASB, where they say to us that, therefore, we encourage the IAASB to thoughtfully consider the benefits, which should include the avoidance of significant negative impact from a single fraud, and the exponential impact dependent on magnitude on the overall investor confidence in the quality of financial reporting and the resultant consequences to the capital markets. I think as we think about this and other such proposals, it is very easy to dismiss it on the strength of, oh, this is, look at it through the cost-benefit analysis and this is what happens. When you live through the trauma of what is being described in the IOSCO letter, you understand that these costs are minor compared to the harm of the standards failing us or the audit failing us under those circumstances. So here is just another appeal as we wrap up this conversation to look back to what the letters actually told us.
Thank you, Imran. I think a number of people have highlighted that type of issue in terms of the tone and the perception that we could give in terms of our activity. And I think the task for the working group is sensitive to that. And I think Lynn's description of the responses highlights some of that, but it's worth reiterating and reminding us that many of our public interest commentators have commented in that way. Lynn, I'm sorry to have interrupted you.
No,
I did invite comments there, and I'm sorry I called on Imran in a tardy fashion.
Tom, if I can just react to that, we have read not only the letters, but the introductory parts of those letters. And as a case in point, the topic we've just talked about, there are only actually 3 responses to it. but we thought the responses were so important that we should raise them as an issue. So we are certainly taking them very seriously, and certainly the impact of fraud is absolutely significant where it happens, and it's a topic that we should not and should never take lightly. Moving right on to forensic specialists, and just repeating what I've already said, is there were significant mixed views in this area, and but there was one agreement, and that agreement was that forensic specialists are not required on all audits. So we took that as a given, and we concentrated on where the mixed views were. And the mixed views were about whether to use a forensic specialist in some circumstances, in certain types of audits or areas of audit, or not requiring them, but rather leaving that to the professional judgment of the auditor. So very split views there about whether you should require the use of specialists in some circumstances and some audits, and equally strong views that it's not required, and it's a matter of to be a requirement, and it should be left to auditors' judgment. There was also a call for possible benefits of training for auditors in forensic matters. Next slide, please. So the working group has agreed that forensic specialists should be considered in the standard, but only in certain circumstances. That is, when an identified or suspected fraud. In this way, there would be recognition that more was needed, but not going as far as to require the use of forensic specialists. This would also help with scalability concerns and the availability of forensic expertise. The working group also considered the changes again made in the UK standard recently, and think that could well be worth considering. And just for those who haven't seen that, the UK requirement reads, the determination of whether specialised skills or knowledge are needed to investigate a misstatement due to fraud or suspected fraud further for the purposes of the audit involves considerations of the particular circumstances. In some circumstances, the auditor may consider it appropriate to use specialist skills and knowledge of a forensic accountant. If management or those charged with governance undertake their own investigation or employ an expert to investigate on their behalf, the audit engagement team may need specialised skills or knowledge to evaluate the findings of that investigation for the purpose of the audit. So we thought that that was worth considering. We also thought about forensic training, and that is outside the remit of the IAASB, but is something we could continue dialogue with other people in the ecosystem on. So moving to the next slide. asked whether we've appropriately identified the key matters and whether you agree or disagree with the possible actions, noting that there are such mixed opinions in this area that I would expect the board not necessarily to be unanimous in this. So if we can go back to the last slide, because I think it's the easiest one to look at in terms of these actions, and if I can hand to you, Tom.
Okay, thank you for that. Anyone want to go first on forensic specialists and the proposed possible action number 2? Imran.
Thank you very much. Raising my hand is not my enthusiasm to go first. It just happened to go up first there. It's easy to agree with the possible actions being put forward, but there's a reason why it's easy to agree for this, because the actions that are described, particularly action A, talks about an after the effect action that the auditor would take. The insight I have tells me that auditors probably do this already. Firm methodology already probably demands it. And also a proper disposition of no-CLA responsibilities may indeed involve the need for the firm to find the appropriate expert or resources to deal with it before you come to that conclusion. So I think that raising the bar here is not typical of the action described in A. That's probably already happening. Raising the bar here is to find actions more like the actions described in B. Otherwise, all we're trying to do is to codify that which is probably already happening and probably already necessary to happen, and very much a risk management response consistent even with our QM thinking in this area. Where I think the working group needs to challenge itself further, please, is how the working group has captured its deliberations in paragraph 45. And so the working group has captured its deliberations as saying the working group considered alternatives to require the use of forensic specialists, because that's the fundamental question here, or require the auditor to consider whether the use of forensic specialists is needed. And they did not favor these alternatives. What they say to us, noting that it will be difficult to describe the entities that are at high risk. I'd love the insight into what has happened in terms of trying to describe that. Our board has a lot of success after some difficulty in describing circumstances when certain procedures can be applied. And we spent a good 2 hours yesterday talking about all those circumstances in which the entire LCE standard can be applied. It took 4 pages to describe when the LCE standard can be described. We also have examples, and the experts in the working group would know this better than me about the circumstances in which, for example, an EQR is needed. I think that we've not gone far enough. We certainly haven't demonstrated to the board why such a list can't be developed and at least debated to see the merits of it before dismissing it as not being possible. The way I read the bulk of the comments captured on page 9 and 10, so everything before paragraph 31 in the issues paper, suggests that this is what people want us to do. There's at least 4 monitoring group responses pushing us in that direction. That's a pretty strong steer if we are to be guided by what we heard in response to the discussion paper. So really encourage, supportive of what's here, but believe that this is only part of the story. We really need to try to do more at an appropriate level, recognizing that it's not forensic specialists for every engagement. That certainly isn't proportionate or necessary. But to say that I've now detected a fraud and invite the forensic specialists along is really too late, and probably what is already happening in the marketplace. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Imran. Kaiwe?
Thanks, Tom. My comment to little a in action 2 is I agree, but only if the engagement team was unable to resolve the matter by obtaining persuasive audited evidence without such expertise. Then I have a comment to little b. Since forensic specialists are educated and trained to address specific situation when there is identified or suspected fraud, unless the other members of the engagement team have specific situations in mind for which they wish to obtain the expertise of forensic specialists, including them in risk identification and assessment or planning, and other phases of an audit will not be effective or efficient. I'm therefore not in favor of using forensic specialists in risk assessment procedures unless the engagement team has specific situation with suspected or identified fraud in mind. Then I have a brief comment to little c. In my view, if engagement team members have reasonable grounds for suspecting fraud or have identified fraud or were unable to resolve the matter by obtaining persuasive evidence, then forensic specialists should be involved. Yeah, that's all. Thanks.
Okay. Next would be Ada.
Thank you, Tom. In respect of bullet A, I started along the lines of the where Imran's coming from as well. I think this has strong ties to NOCLAR. Well, suspected or identified fraud typically is non-compliance with laws and regulations, and in that instance, management first need to take action with those charged with governance and resolve it, and the auditors will follow suit in a lot of cases with the help of forensic specialists if it involves fraud. I'm wondering whether that link can be made more explicit or bring a similar structure in. And as that process is followed through, the auditor will then be able to satisfy him or herself whether this is addressed appropriately. I think, and just wanted to share some ways I've seen it in practice in how forensic specialists are involved, and I can see 3 levels of involvement, and it fits a little bit through A, B, and C in where more on a consultation basis, the team can ask for specialized help, but you can also envisage a model where some forensic specialists coach the team along the lines of their discussion, but also in the design of their procedures as they deal with fraud risk factors and potential fraud risks. And I can also envisage a scenario where forensic specialists are in fact involved in the audit in completing and executing procedures. And I think circumstances can be sketched out to guide practitioners to the appropriate use of people with broader experience in the fraud arena than potentially the engagement team itself. So that's what I had, Lynn. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fernando.
Thank you, Tom. Lynn, I also support your recommendation on letter A about consideration of forensics. I think that in reality, for many firms and different jurisdictions, the requirement to include forensics is going to be a huge burden. And fraud, it's different depending on the types, nature of the business, size of the company, and some of them are pretty easy in terms of identification and fixing, and having a specialist probably actually just creates a big issue in terms of not complying with the requirements, and we're gonna see inconsistencies in execution, which is something that we're trying to avoid. Very much in favor that there's a consideration from the team to include them either in risk assessment or when they think it's necessary, depending again in the facts and circumstances. And I do not really object on the training. I guess on the contrary, I think many firms now are discussing to have certain level of education for the different levels across the firm to understand a little bit more in terms of forensic. It's not going to be, of course, as being a specialist, but having at least certain abilities that help them identify the issues at the right time and then just raise hands to bring other people. I think it's going to be important and encourage these to either be part of application material or education material or some other way that could be communicated to all of us in practice. Thanks.
Thank you. Eric?
Thanks. I just wanted to indicate my support for the recommendations of the working group. Obviously, the devil's in the details once we actually get into the mechanics of it, but I think this is a very balanced response to the different views that were being heard through the consultation. So I'm supportive. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Sachka.
Thank you, Tom. I have several comments with regard to possible action. Firstly, I agree with the proposal that the auditor is required to consider the use of forensic specialists when there is identified or suspected fraud. And secondly, as described in paragraph 40 of agenda item 3, I think the meaning of forensic specialist should be clarified. I think it is very important because the meaning of this term may be different from person to person, and people who are called as specialists may have different skills and knowledge. For example, some may interpret to mean specialists who perform forensic investigation procedure on identified fraud or suspected fraud at the entity, while others interpret to mean it also includes personnel in the firm who has specialized skill and knowledge about the financial reporting fraud in the audit. And I think there is also an issue as to how we can ensure consistent quality of the work performed by the forensic specialists. And thirdly, in terms of use of forensic specialists during the risk assessment procedures, I think it is more appropriate to involve personnel in the firm who has specialized skills and knowledge about the financial reporting fraud in the audit, rather than specialists who perform forensic investigation procedures. For example, it is more beneficial to involve personnel with significant experience and knowledge in the audit and of financial reporting fraud, and who conduct consultation across the engagements in the firm's quality management system. It is because forensic investigation procedures are very different from risk assessment procedure during an audit, while forensic investigation procedures are usually performed after fraud or suspected fraud is identified. Risk assessment procedures during the audit are performed to identify risks of material misstatement due to fraud. In addition, I think it is appropriate to require the auditors to determine whether the use of such a personnel is necessary based on the circumstances to ensure scalability. Lastly, relating to my previous point, when we pursue this action, I think we should consider the scalability very carefully, since smaller firms may not be able to access forensic specialists. That's all from me. Thank you.
Okay. I just want to remind us is that, and I'm not, Sachka, this is not into you because I've now heard through lots of comments, just not specifically. We have to be careful when we're at this stage of the project, not to be opining on potential conclusions. I think the real goal is to understand whether the scope as defined on this area is sufficiently appropriate for the board to consider as we continue using Lynn's metaphor as we funnel down to describing what are the key public interest objectives that we're trying to see and what is the scope of the project, therefore, to address those 4, 5, 6, whatever they are, public interest objective. So I just, there's a little bit of that creeping in, is because I believe this, then not that. I think the question is the scope appropriate, too narrow, too broad? I think we've got a few comments in that point, and therefore I think A, B, and C is a potential scope in. Some of you would suggest really focus on that rather than particular outcomes at this juncture. Okay, we'll continue. It's not pervasive, but I just want to caution us about not getting too far ahead of ourselves about opining on solutions. Sue?
I'll try and keep that in mind, Tom. It's a little bit late to flex that much. I think Lynn, on A, I think that has summarised and balanced the different feedback that you've got, and I think where you've landed balances the scalability concerns, and by discussing consideration of auditor judgment and consideration in particular is responsive to the feedback. On B, I think there you've highlighted the pieces about defining what's meant by a forensic specialist, and the again, the scalability considerations there. I think Ado raised some really interesting points about perhaps where we could be thinking about describing the value that forensic specialists may add, and I really like the use of the coaching language, because I think one of the things that was coming through from the responses is about the audit teams upskilling those, and so the kind of coaching and support role that a forensic specialist could bring in certain situations would be useful. So building those examples out, I think, would be great. And then the training piece, I take on board what you've both said about the scope of the IAASB's ability to address things and influence, but also I think Bev referenced the activities of IFAC, and obviously there is a lot of work going on there, particularly around setting the education requirements for professional accountants. And we've seen the work that has been done in building in evolving areas such as technology, sustainability, and so on. And so as well as IAASB potential education, there could be an opportunity to work to build that kind of capability into the education programs and expectations of professional accountants and auditors in particular. Thanks.
Thank you. So, Yosh?
Thank you, Tom, and thank you very much for Lynn and task force. Very good paper, easy to read for me. And I have about the comment about the action 2. I'm supporting A, small a, and so I agree to use the forensic specialist for the suspected fraud for be identified. But option B, I think it should be cautious for selected B, because it seems to be practically difficult to determine that they should be involved from the stage before the risk assessment is completed. It might be useful to examine the trigger events for considering the use of forensic specialists, and also effective to consider the use of forensic specialists mainly in the phase of response to the assessed risk, because it should be a responsibility for the auditors, not forensic specialists, I think. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Isabel?
Hi.
Yes.
Isabel?
Hello, everybody. I support the possible actions, and more particularly on action A. I think we should keep some judgment. So requiring the auditor to consider, I may switch. Yes, requiring the auditor to consider the use of forensic specialists is the right way of addressing that, because fraud may be simple or complex, significant or not significant. So I think we have to keep some flexibility to involve such a specialist. As a practitioner, I had the opportunity to experience the value of involving such specialists in an audit. They helped me ask the relevant questions to management and to others in the entity. They helped me develop relevant audit procedures. And also, and very importantly, they helped me conclude that sufficient work has been done to deal with the issue. But when we looked at your point B, and we discussed it in France, in fact, I don't really know what forensic means. I've always seen forensic used in English literature or in English methodologies, in methodology written in English. And I never really realized what it meant. To me, it was the equivalent of fraud specialist. And then I went to the dictionary to understand what forensic means. And the translation in French of forensic is judiciaire. And then I take this word judiciaire, I go to the dictionary to translate it back to English. And it's judicial. So it means that forensics equal judicial. So maybe I missed something because I also understand from the dictionary that forensic is used in medicine when someone has been killed. And a doctor is coming to understand how what the murderer has done to kill the person. So I'm not really sure that's exactly what we need, and that's exactly what I get when I have such people working with me in my team. Maybe fraud specialist would be sufficient.
I think we've heard everything to this point, though the connection has not been great. I just wonder, I guess the great point was about the use of the language in forensic, whether it translates well and whether the task force needs to consider alternative language, considering translation and applicability beyond English-speaking countries, if I got that right. Isabel, if you could connect later and you have more comments to add, we'll take your input. Roger?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Always hard to come in after Isabel and discussions around murder and everything else. Strongly support this. I think this is an area to the exploration. I think this is an area that has the potential to improve the procedures. So strongly support I think the benefits as you outline them, and also when you did the research too, there's a number of benefits of including forensic skills. They bring a lot of knowledge about the types of engagement characteristics where potential types of frauds could be seen. I believe that they add to the discussion on the knowledge and skills and capability of other people, which is part of the training as well. And they bring processes to this as to how you go through and evaluating them. And there is quite a lot of research which represents the benefits of that. So, and Lynn, your task force has looked at that research in the past and identified that types of research. So I would be very strongly, I think there is a probably framework where you could put that into as to engagement characteristics, as to knowledge and skill of the participants, and as to the types of processes there. Some of the standard setting groups, the US in particular, have looked at the types of processes around forensic specialists and bringing them in, and the types of benefits that are associated with them. So very much encourage the working group to explore this particular area. I think it has great potential to improve the auditors area of in the area of fraud. Thank you.
Okay. Next is Chun-Li.
Thank you, Tom. I just want to add a very brief comment to this. I think the feedback from the respondents are very well summarized, and I think we see mixed views, we see clear emphasis on scalability. And to that end, well, I definitely, like others, encourage the exploration of standard setting actions. And I think this could have a real change in the impact and the way fraud get looked into. I think, as always, we will focus on the behavioral impact as well. And I think we need to be cautious of the risk that having a requirement, even in specific circumstances, may actually result in a perverse behavior whereby engagement team may downplay suspected fraud to avoid additional cause or hassle in their mind of engaging a forensic specialist, especially in practice that are resource thin. So I'm sure we have that in mind as we continue the exploration. So I just want to put that point across. Thanks.
Thank you. Next is Josephine.
Thank you. Yes, Lynn, these are all sensible and responsive to the comments raised by the respondents, absolutely. The only other point I wanted to put forward to the working group to explore as to whether there is something that might be needed once you get to your conclusions, exploring B and C. Something that might be needed also in 220 that connects that conversation that the engagement partner has with the firm as to whether they have sufficient resources on the engagement and that consideration point, and therefore how does this idea that perhaps a forensic specialist or someone with such specialist skills might be needed in an audit. So just an additional thought. I know it didn't come through necessarily in the response letters, but as I'm looking through your proposed areas for exploring here, I thought that might be another one to add here. Thank you.
Thank you. Kai Morton.
Thank you. I'll stay relatively short here. I think, yes, the working group has summarized well. And I think I got muted. Yeah, I agree with the direction from the working group and the suggestions here. Just caution, as you all already have done, the scalability, and as if this has to be done on all engagements, as others have brought up as well, the scalability part here is really important.
Yeah, I just have a question on that. Wouldn't we naturally as a board always look at scalability part and not preclude that up front? I just have that in mind a little bit as well. So it's a good point, but I don't think it preempts our discussions, because I think we always have a mind towards scalability.
I think you called on me, but you were cut off. Thanks, Tom. I believe that these possible actions are responsive, and I I like Sachiko's comments about professional judgment is very important, and Chun-Wee's weigh in on unintended consequences, and Isabel's very nice story about what does forensic mean, because one of my recommendations would be to remove for the word forensic. I'm not opposed to specialists, but the word forensic is a little confusing. And I did listen very carefully to Lynn's reading of the FRC's change standard, and the words are slightly different. So I just suggest we look at that. And lastly, but most importantly, I think we have to weave in here somehow the use of technology, because technology that is out there today, you know, making sure that that is not excluded per se from whatever we recommend, because there is technology that can be used in risk assessment, and this also goes to the scalability piece, that can very quickly help you determine where fraud might be. So that's my only real add to the discussion. Thank you.
Josephine?
Just to confirm that we still have the terminology forensic in the standard. It just remains in the application material where it is in fact today in the international standard. Thank you.
It sounds like forensic accountant, though, is what I heard, not specialist or expert.
It's forensic skills.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So, you know, as I read it, there was a lot of cautions, there was a lot of support for the general approach here. I did think there was a couple of cautions that whether it was implicit in things, so whether we need to consider slightly more ambitious requirements in this as well. And I don't take that off the table, but at least for consideration for the working group, or maybe where greater clarity in requirements. I got a sense of when a forensic specialist or other would be required as well, or at least should be considered. I read that, inferred that from a number of comments, is whether we're appropriately ambitious. I don't want to opine on what the conclusion is here. This is the part of the standard setting that would go forward, but you know, an examination of whether our requirements are robust enough in terms of how people in a risk-based world would consider the use of forensic specialists throughout. Anyone else like to add anything on this topic before I hand it back to Lynn and Dev? My point is a little bit about the ambition. Lynn, back to you.
Thanks, Tom, and I admire everybody's passion for this topic. Everybody has an opinion and everybody has multiple solutions, so really appreciate the thought you've put into your comments. Just a couple of things to mention. NOCLAR comes up in the July conversation, so the connection between this topic and NOCLAR will be further explored in July. I heard a lot of support for the recommendations, and I think I detected a sense of engagement team decision-making rather than requirements, but we'll go back and listen to the tapes and make sure we've got that right. And certainly the meaning of forensic specialist, no matter what we do, will be useful. And finally, I'd just like to, I liked the 3-level framework from Edo, so that was useful input, and along with everything else. So thank you all very much. And Tom, I presume we're going to a break before we move on to the next item.
Yes, so we'll take a 15-minute break right now. We'll reconvene at 6:55 my time, 5 minutes before the hour and your other time zones. And we'll speak to you soon. Thanks.
Unknown caller.
Hello.
Okay, we'll rejoin. I think just summarizing what we're saying is that there is scope for standard setting and looking at our requirements on the previous two topics. I don't want to prejudge it right now. And maybe as we get to the next action, you're going to be offered a couple of options. I think that the working group will require on action 3 specific guidance of which option people prefer. We may have to vote at the end, but we'll welcome conversation on it. But I guess, again, reminding people, do they agree with the scope of what's being proposed for standard setting activity by the working group, and really helping us to guide as we go down that funnel? Lynn, do you have any suggestions for board members as they interact on this? And we're really getting to learn how we deal with this research gathering and information phase as we get into the project proposal of things that will be useful for you as a working group as you try to proceed on your work.
Yes. No, I'm not sure I do, Tom. I think the on the next section, the definition of fraud is not an easy one, and the working group have different opinions. So maybe a vote up front on that, and then people adding their comments will give us a sense of which direction people are in. Would that be all right?
Should we try that approach, board?
Yeah.
Okay. So
if it doesn't work, we'll try something else, but let's give that one a go.
Okay, so you would like to get a sense of the board of where people are leaning in terms of option one or two. I guess the alternative would be none of the above, and then we'll have to explore that too. But could I get a sense from the board with hands potentially raised, digital hands raised, who leans towards one? And then we'll invite commentary, obviously, on the options, so you could clarify your direction. But we want to see where if there's a sense of direction for the board. In terms of option 1 on possible action 3, is there a sense that that's a preferred over option 2? I can't raise my hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, option 2, put hands down. Okay, that's 4, 5, 14. So that means that we have 4 that are in the none of the above camp too. Is that right? Can you raise your hands? Hands down. There's some that are just also made. Okay. So what I would like to propose is if there are a couple of people that feel strongly in favor of why option 1 is the right approach, to articulate that, and then we'll get some diversity of viewpoints. Would that make sense, Lynn?
Yep, that'd be useful to get
we don't need everyone yet, but I feel like it would be great to hear if people feel strongly about option 1 and you have a strong argument of why that's the appropriate scope of the project, of potential project proposal as it relates to this issue, because I think that's the issue at hand, why you feel that's the way and why it's better than option 2. Anyone who we had 9 hands raised. Okay, Edo, thank you.
Yeah, I'll take debate. I actually think that the one doesn't preclude the other, Tom. But if I have to choose, it would be option one. So I think it's stronger to particularly linking bribery and corruption, which is a significant issue as part of this. That it's part of the standard and part of the application material. But I can clearly envisage that some non-authoritative guidance complements that. But if I have to choose, it would be option one. Thanks.
Right. So your argument is that it needs to be in the authoritative materials, and that should be at least at minimum. Am I understanding that, Eric?
I'm very similar to Ido. I would actually support both options, but if I had to choose, I would choose one. And I think, as Ido articulated, I think the link between 240 and 250 needs to be clarified somewhat, and that would be best done through application material, in my view. Thank you.
And another part is that just focusing on B, not that you preclude B as an outcome, but it may be too limited up front. Is that the point there too, if I'm understanding? Kai, Uwe?
Tom, thanks. I'm also in favor of this clarification application material like option one, because I believe that clarifying the difference between fraud and other no-clar is in the public interest, and that providing guidance on how this might interact is important too. Thanks.
Okay. For those, if there's one or two that were in favor of option two, having heard what you've heard, I'd like to get your response. So.
And it wasn't a strong preference for me, and actually I liked what Edo said about, one doesn't necessarily preclude the other, but my thoughts really on option two was that it had the opportunity for more timely guidance, the ability to be updated, as we see evolution and for example, changes in technology that provide different insights. So it was more around the ability to get more timely information out.
Okay. Sachika?
Thank you, Tom. I just want to say, sorry, I raised my hand to option one, but actually I prefer option two. It's very early morning in Tokyo, so I'm just confused about which one is one. Why I prefer option two is because I think if we pursue option one, there may be some risk of creating a misunderstanding of the auditor's responsibility is expanded. That's the reason. But I just raised my hand because I just say, sorry, I was wrong. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone? Josephine?
I was coming at it from the perspective of we're exploring here. And so the question I really took from this is, should we explore the need to clarify how these other concepts are often associated, and should we clarify them following what we've heard from our respondents? And therefore, rather like Eric and Ado, I was, if I had to choose, I would choose option one. But I think ultimately it's, what do we come up with? What does it look like? And then where is this best place, given that our application material is about the why, the how, etc. Does it actually work with application material, or would it be better with non-authoritative guidance? So what is it first, and then where should it be is really the way I was thinking about this. But if it helps the working group, then I would therefore land on option one if need be. Thank you.
So let me restate this, make me understand, is that it should definitely, your view is that this topic should be explored, but we shouldn't be limited to the tool by which we explore it, whether it be application material, non-authoritative guides, or even something more than that. It's just, we should be more open-ended with our willing exploration of this topic. Based upon feedback, it merits consideration as we go through the funnel to the project proposal, and that we shouldn't unduly limit ourselves on option 1 or 2, both of which could be outcomes, but there could be other outcomes as well from a standard setting toolbox.
Yeah, thank
Is
you.
is that a fair reflection?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so that's a broader scope, and Lynn, I want you to react to that, because that's a different articulation than your options, because I'll have other people who want to come in too, but
yeah. Tom, I think that's really useful to us. It says that there's a slight preference for application material, but quite a strong preference for exploring this this particular item further to respond to what we've heard. I would say that this is an area that isn't without its complexity, given that fraud is defined in law in most countries. So we're going to have to look quite carefully at the different settings across the world from a legal perspective. So the no-CLAR comments are very, very pertinent.
okay, so you've added some perspective there as well. Imran, so we've re-articulated option 1 and 2. Neither, to some extent, Josephine's re-articulation, then Lynn following up, is option 1 and 2 are too limited, rather than the exploration with the potential linkages and lenses applied. Permits a broader exploration and use of the full toolkit within our standard setting toolbox. But Imran, I want to get your perspective on this since you raised your hand.
Thank you. Tom, the words you used.
We lost you, the audio, Imran.
Let me try that again.
Okay, that's better.
The words you used in summarizing that discussion was that there could be other outcomes, or there could be even something more. I understand that, and that's why I didn't raise my hand to endorse either option 1 or option 2. But my reasoning for it may go a little bit deeper than the conversation we've just had. I think that bribery and corruption are inseparable from the concept of fraud. And that's the reason why we would want to reconsider the definition. I would hate for Michael's meeting report to the PIOB to say that because of the unintended consequences of this definition change, the board has decided not to include bribery and corruption within its definition. I think that action on our part for fear of unintended consequences in itself will have real consequences for the board. And the idea of the way the issues paper puts it forward, that we may not be in support of expanding the definition of fraud, isn't something that I endorse at this point. So I like the way the conversation has headed. It's sort of shifted to a more primary possibility of us doing something more than what is captured in either option 1 or option 2. Thank you.
Okay. Lynn, are you comfortable? Are people comfortable with the way Lynn has recast the discussion? And I guess based upon Imran's comment, he is certainly comfortable. I got Josephine; she was sort of in the camp. But are we broadly happy with where the advice and feedback, Lynn? Do you think you have clear feedback from the board on this topic?
No, not at present, because what I'm hearing now is different from what I heard earlier, and that is that we should relook at the definition of fraud. And what we're recommending is not expanding the definition, but further explaining in some other way. And if we're going to reconsider the definition of fraud, that's a pretty significant change to what we're recommending. So I was okay until we got to the point of reconsidering the definition. So is that your reading, that you want the board wants us to relook at the definition as well as application material and guidance, or is it to explain the definition clearer, including bribery and corruption, in application material or guidance?
I read it as the latter. Is that everyone else's reading of it? Ado, you raise your hand.
Mm-hmm. Yes. No, that's not exactly how I read it. I think we need to make clear how bribery and corruption is considered as part of fraud, and we need to action that. That's different than where Imran is coming from. Well, we do need to take action on it, but it's not, I don't think it's necessary to change the definition for it, as long as it's abundantly clear that those concepts, how those are interlinked and how the auditor considers those for the purpose of his or her work. Thank you.
Any response to Ado's clarification, which I do think is very
found it helpful.
Yes. Imran?
Yes, Tom, I'm in agreement with Ado's.
I'm sorry, Imran, you cut out again.
I'm in agreement with Ado's clarification. The point I make is what Ado is describing is different to what the issues paper describes as limitations and why we can't.
We're losing you. I for some reason your audio is cutting out. I heard I am fine with the way Ado is describing it.
Correct. I'm fine with the way Ado is describing.
Right, and that you just wanted to say that's not exactly how it was put in the issues paper, right? So you would be. It's a nuanced characterization of not going fully at definition. But the
yes, so yeah, if I can, the issues paper makes the point that focusing on bribery and corruption may result in significantly increased costs on all audits without proportionate benefit. It also makes the point that explicitly requiring focus on bribery and corruption may increase the scope of financial statement audit. My point is, I always thought that it was part of the scope. This is not something that we've chosen to exclude. The public expectation around when we speak about fraud, we speak about it in all of its facets, including that related to bribery and corruption. And Ado's language was much more elegant than the one I've described to make it abundantly clear. However, we do so that the fraud definition includes this, even if it doesn't mean having to recast the definition.
Right, okay. That's further precision on this. Lynn, Diane, I see your hand is up. I'm going to get to you, but I want to go back to Lynn and say, your reaction to Ado's comments, do you think that gives helpful clarification? No sound. You're on mute, sorry.
I agreed with both Ado and Imran. I think that was good clarification and gives the working group something to base the next steps on. So thank you.
I'm glad we had this conversation. Ado, thank you very much for your intervention and providing greater precision with what sometimes we talk in some shorthands, and it's sometimes necessary to really be precise. Diane, your hand was raised, you went
Yeah.
down. I assume you're supportive of the direction that we're heading on this, which
Yeah.
is
I'm on the working group, and I just wanted to make sure, because I thought I knew where we were headed, and then I was not, and now I'm back.
okay.
Thank you.
Can we, Lynn, I'll ask you just to summarize your understanding of where we're headed for the record, so we know that we're no longer on option one or two. We're not recasting the entire definition of fraud. We're fill in the blank for us.
Tom, at the risk of repeating what Ido said incorrectly, for the record, I think that's it. What he said is what we've agreed.
Okay, and we have that on. We'll have that fully minuted. It's on video, and it's a broader approach than was originally proposed on option 1 and 2. I think you can nod your heads. People are broadly supportive of that approach. Good discussion there. Sorry, a little back and forth. Again, thank you for your clear articulation. Imran, thank you for raising the point. I think we got to a good spot there. Suspicious mindset is next.
Excellent, thank you. So can we move on to that slide, please? Okay, in April, we agreed not to pursue the concept of suspicious mindset more broadly in 240. But we said we would look at if there were any limited circumstances where you should use it. We also said that we would certainly strengthen professional skepticism as we went through the standard setting, and if necessary, in any guidance for examples. So we have had another consideration of suspicious mindset, which I note there was not a lot of support both in the responses and the outreach, but there was some encouragement to further look at the specific circumstances. So that's what we've done, and we don't recommend introducing the concept of suspicious mindset into the ISAs. Rather, we recommend emphasising the concept of professional skepticism through all 3 parts: requirements, application material, and non-authoritative guidance, and also making sure this is an area professional skepticism is going across evidence and fraud and 600 at present. So making sure that we collaborate with the other work streams on possible enhancements is important. So that is our proposal. Firstly, not recommending the concept of a suspicious mindset, but significantly enhancing the current concepts that we have and collaborating with others is our proposal.
Okay, thank you. Suspicious mindset. One of the ways we may deal with this, I thought the last discussion was really good and it showed the evolution of the board, is I want to get a sense from the board for those who are broad support of the possible action number 4. And then it will give me a sense of where we should take the discussion. Who's in broad, by raise of hand, support of the actions, the proposed approach on action 4? Okay. 15, I'm 16, I'm 17. Len, I don't see your hand up, so are you want to add something of an alternative?
No, I'm in a working group, so I didn't know. I need to have
No, you're a full board member of this. So there's broad support. 18 of us are in support of this possible action. So that's great. Now, people put the hands down, because I'm not going to stop there, because we're all about providing helpful advice. Any context beyond the possible action number 4 that we want to give to the working group on suspicious mindset? Josephine.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just a very minor point. So inherent in that forensic expertise is actually that suspicious mindset. So I see the work listed here as being linked with the question of an engagement partner as to whether forensic skills are needed in the engagement. And so there is an overlap here between action 4 and action 2. So that was the only point that I wanted to raise on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Josephine. Next is Sue.
Thanks. I just wanted to say that in the issues paper, you've got a suggestion about guide and non-authoritative guidance that could illustrate the ramping up of procedures. And I thought that was a really good idea, because it shows the build.
Thank you. Imran.
Yes, thank you very much. Just a small intervention to make on this. We had an earlier conversation about where we make recommendations in respect of others in the ecosystem and what they can do, and whether that may give the impression that we're passing the buck. I think particularly around what we describe as possible action 4 and the need to collaborate with other IAASB work streams. I know we default to this suggestion often. It's not an uncommon feature of what comes out of our consultations. It would be really helpful when we get to the project proposal stage that we add some specifics about what that means. Otherwise, it'll just become a list of interactions that we have to have without necessarily placing something on the agenda of those groups that we're referencing, with some expectation of what it is that we will be getting back and what we will be advancing in our conversations with them. So much so that I'd expect that we want to hear back from those groups at some point about their voice, what the reaction to these proposals and requests are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's a call for specificity in the project proposal, which is forthcoming. Lynn, I hope you feel like you got useful feedback here, support for the approach on suspicious mindset, and also some suggestions as we look forward on this topic and as we move towards project proposal.
Thank you. And Japan has done some good work in terms of this. They don't talk about suspicious mindset, but they talk about when you have suspicions. And I think there's some useful material there that we'll be able to look at and potentially use. So that is helpful. Thank you very much. Shall we move on?
Yeah, to rebuttal presumption.
There are a couple of issues here. Firstly, around the existing requirement for revenue, should it stay or should it go? And there were views that it was no longer relevant in some cases, while others had the view that the focus on fraud and revenue was still important. So that was the first view. The second was that maybe we should expand the rebuttable presumption to other areas. And finally, some respondents noted that we needed to be clearer about the rebuttable presumption, what it's okay to rebut, and what needs to be documented. So where we've got to at this stage on this one, next slide, please. Is we don't recommend expanding the rebuttable presumption of fraud in revenue recognition in the requirements, but we do suggest a standard setting in the form of enhancing the application material to 240 to highlight other areas that might be susceptible to material fraud, misstatement due to fraud, clarifying that it may be appropriate to rebut the presumption of fraud in revenue recognition and how this can be done, and to consider public sector considerations. This is particularly because revenue is not the big item of risk in the public sector. And we thought that it could potentially be useful to have some non-authoritative guidance relating to certain industries in this particular area. That may not have the same priority as the standard setting, but could be helpful to particular groupings. So that's where we got to on the rebuttable presumption, Tom. Back to you for comments on that action. So we won't move off this slide, we'll stay here.
We'll move off this slide. Okay, I'd like to get a sense of those who are, what I'm trying to do is figure out where the point of difference is and then have debate on it, but clarify it. Who's, by show of hands, who's broadly supportive of the rebuttable assumption possible action number 5? Okay, so I have Imran and Josephine who have some reservations. So put your hands down, and I want to hear the reservations, and we can have a discussion about that, because maybe it offers a different option for us to consider. Shall we? You wanted to comment. Why don't you come in now, and then we'll ask Josephine and Imran to speak.
Thanks, Tom. Well, first of all, I broadly support, which is why I put up my hand. But I do question a little bit on the focus, especially on B, focusing on rebuttal. And I think in the December meeting, I mentioned how I was a little bit surprised to see that the feedback from practitioners, and I think at that time it was through the different outreach rather than from the discussion paper, but it seemed to be focused on rebuttal of fraud risk rather than on proper and robust identification and assessment of the fraud risk relating to revenue recognition. And I think it's quite telling where some practitioners have been investing their time and energy. So while I agree with the working group I agree with the working group that we should not be removing the rebuttal presumption. I feel that we should be considering ways we can help shift the focus in practice from rebuttal to proper fraud risk assessment. So just on the focus bit, I have slight reservations, which I thought I'll just flag at this point. Thanks.
Okay. Any reaction to Chun-Li's comments? Ada?
Yes, and I would agree with Chun-Li. The rebuttable presumption is there for a reason, and I rather have the teams spend time on looking into it and potentially doing some procedures rather than spending a lot of time on rebutting the presumption.
Okay. Eric?
Similar views. I think there is an opportunity to provide more guidance around identifying the fraud risks in the revenue area more effectively and efficiently. And so I support Chun-Li and Edo's direction with that too.
Okay, Josephine?
Thank you. I agree with Chun-Wei, Ado, and Eric on this. And with that in mind, though, I feel that we are exploring here, and I don't think we're actually at a position yet, even reading through the responses and given all the feedback that we got from the roundtable, that expanding the rebuttable presumption itself is off the table. That was my only reservation here. But having said that, I am very much in line with their views that it's actually making sure that more robust work is done in the area, particularly around fraud risks. Thank you.
Sorry, Imran?
Yes. All the speakers have spoken before me on this. I'm in agreement with their points. I think that the perspective I want to bring to this conversation is that it is not a discussion principally about expanding or removing, and they agree with the tentative conclusions of the task force of the working group and what's been said. My worry is about the risk of inappropriate rebuttal, and therefore the third category of the discussion that's within the issues paper. And thinking that the focus of our board on enhancement should be on when it is inappropriate, as opposed to when and how it is appropriate. Because talking more about when and how it is appropriate could unintentionally encourage a further rebuttal in practice. And we really have very good data to support why we should be doing something about inappropriate rebuttal. There is a reference to a CPAB publication on this. In their CPAB exchange, they said, they note that the presumption of fraud risk in revenue recognition was rebutted in a quarter of all audit files they reviewed, which they expressed was higher than expected based on the risk profiles of the audits that they selected for inspection, recognizing that inspection goes after high risk audits. To expect to find a quarter of all of those audits having the revenue rebutted surprised them. There is a similar insight in the IRBA's inspection reports that the rebuttal of the presumed fraud risk in revenue recognition appears to become a default practice at some firms. In every single file, we're finding it rebutted. And that can't be the basis on which we set out to put these requirements into the standard. So really would encourage the working group to see whether shifting focus to the inappropriate rebuttal would help us achieve what we're trying to do in this area. Thank you.
Okay, so those are what I feel we got was some enhancement on top of the possible action. Lynn, do you have any reaction to what you've heard, which was articulated by Chun-Wei, Edo, Josephine, Imran, but not substantially different than what you had proposed?
I found that conversation incredibly useful. I absolutely accept the link and the importance to fraud risks. And obviously, as we work through 240 and incorporate 315 concepts further into the standard, that will be an important part of it and an important link here. And I like Imran's comments around inappropriate rebuttal. I think that really would strengthen B, so we can add that to the proposal. So yes, good comments and clear in terms of a way forward.
And I apologize if I missed someone in my list in there. Eric, I think, also commented there. So sorry, Eric, I did not mean to miss you out there. But I think that's a really good discussion. So we've built on, by doing it this way, we've built on what the possible action number 5 is. And we've added a couple of good focus areas. Okay, are we ready for the next action?
we are, because it's the last one. And this was an area where we didn't get a lot of strong calls for changes, but we still thought it was an area which is important in the current environment, and we should take a look at it. We believe it's important to include this in the project proposal to consider whether further changes are needed to the external confirmation process, although there are views that this is often not a reliable source of evidence, and in some cases, where it was from a third party, and in those cases, there may be a higher risk of fraud. So this was an area where not a lot from the respondents, not a strong call for change, but certainly something that we should think about. And so we have thought about it, and obviously, if we go to possible action 6, coordinating with the Audit Evidence Task Force here is important, because this is a part of audit evidence, and we need to make sure that we keep in tandem in this area. Certainly modernising the application material, because now many of the external confirmations are done electronically from practitioners, and the responses are electronic as well. So we need to think about modernising the application material in that regard. And the other areas where we thought we could enhance application material, or maybe the non-authoritative guidance, is what to do about non-responses. This is definitely an issue that people have raised and have concerns about, whether they are useful when there's a heightened risk of fraud, and modernising the negative confirmations in line with current practice, building on the first one. So that's where we've got to. Once again, not a strong theme of the feedback, but certainly within the working group, there have been identified that there are issues. I think one of the challenges here is determining how many of the challenges relate to fraud specifically, and how many of them are more general. And that's obviously a topic that we'd have to pursue between the Evidence Task Force and the Fraud Working Group. So with that, Tom, handing back to you for any, for how you want to deal with this one.
Okay, I think we found a little bit of rhythm here with asking who's broadly supportive of the possible action number 6. More time. Okay. I'm down at 13. So there are 4 people that are not. So I'll invite them, hands down. For those who were reluctant to express support, I'd like to hear from you on some of your concerns, and then maybe that will trigger a further enhancement. Kaiue?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I'm concerned that the proposal in relation to external confirmation is too broad. The focus needs to be on issues they relate to fraud, not to modernize and revise ISO 550. That's my main concern. Thanks.
Okay. Isabel?
Yes. My concern is also, does it relate to ISA 240 or does it relate to ISA 505? And if it relates to ISA 505, is it a kind of conforming change, or could we have another project that may be a limited scope amendment of ISA 505? We may have some quick wins. Point B, modernizing and including technology in external confirmation. I think we definitively need it, and we almost have it, because some will remember that about 9-10 years ago, IAASB issued a staff paper on external confirmation and dealt with this aspect of technology in external confirmation. So we have already a lot of good guidance that is hiding somewhere on the IAASB internet site that we could reuse, recycle, and maybe do a limited scope amendment to ISA 505. On C triple I could not understand from the paper what we mean that in line with current practice. I'm sharing with you my practice in my country. It's prohibited, negative confirmation, because we believe it does not provide enough evidence, and that it's a risk, and that it's dangerous, and that it cannot help you to detect fraud. So my recommendation on this point would be to consider removing this ability to have negative confirmation. Thank you.
Okay. Eric?
Thanks, Tom. And, you know, I was just a bit conflicted here as to whether it's possible to make meaningful change without opening up 505, recognizing that that's not the scope of the project. So I was, that's the thing that's sort of in the back of my mind, is whether how much we can really make changes without opening up 505. And it's kind of along the lines of what Isabel was saying. And maybe when the task force comes back, we can have a better view on what really would be effective in dealing with the issue.
Okay, I think a couple of views. I'll let Imran speak.
Thank you, Tom. I think that it's fair to say that in this area, we had very little from respondents. And that's why the issues paper is very brief here. And like Isabel, I didn't completely understand or couldn't find in the issues paper what the current practice was around negative confirmations that was being described. So with that said, I support action A and I support action C2 only. But the reason for that is that most of what is being requested, I think, falls within the scope of the audit evidence task group as opposed to the fraud task group. And that the reference in ISA 240 really stems from the principles in ISA 500, including reliability of audit evidence, which includes the subject of external confirmations. So any amendments or elaborations that we may envisage in ISA 240, I reckon would probably be flow-throughs or consequential to amendments that we are going to make anyway in ISA 500. And I was really unclear about what would be achieved or what the potential outcome would be of what we describe as the potential action in B. Isabel makes the legal argument about this in France. I've either never seen or understand that it is very rare also within our environment to come across negative confirmations. And for the reason that it's just not a very useful piece of audit evidence because it only provides negative assurance as opposed to positive assurance. Thus, giving additional procedures would really be an inefficient response of our board, I think, in this area. Thank you.
I listened to this conversation and also the response that we got from the discussion paper, I also note that we've been dealing with every issue one at a time throughout this. And when we come back as a whole, we may discover that we have too many issues on our plate to begin with to do a tight, focused, publicly interested, responsive to public interest project in a rapid time frame. One of the things is the task force, the working group has gotten some guidance here about parts that emphasize not, this may be a lower priority issue as it relates to this topic to begin with because of its overlap with other areas that are on our active work program as well. So that seems to be one of the things that's in the back of my mind is when we put Humpty Dumpty back together again in terms of all the things we've sort of said we're going to do, would this rise to one of the leading priorities as well? So I don't have substantive objections to possible action 6, but having heard the discussion about fear of scope creep, fear of issues related to this, I just wondered whether the working group would sort of also evaluate the priority of this topic vis-a-vis other important areas that we have identified today in the previous discussions. Lynn?
Yeah, this both from responses and from our discussions does not come into the #1 priority list. And I think people have rightly identified, and I did mention it when I introduced this topic, the real challenge is to work out which bits of this are actually to do with fraud and which are more generic. So I think what we've heard is all fair. It's in line with the working group's discussions in terms of scope, in terms of coordination with audit evidence, in terms of negative confirmations. So I think when we come back, I won't preempt the working group. I'll just summarise what I've heard. So this is something though that we do need to talk to the audit evidence group, and it's going to have to be ongoing because as we do both proposals, there will be things that are fraud specific that need to be in 240 and things that are evidence specific that need to be in 50 that either task force identifies. And as long as we work in tandem on that, it should, the timeframes work quite nicely. So with that, Tom, I think I have now finished the issues that we're going to put before the committee. We only, you'll be pleased to know, have 4 left of the bits, and then we'll be starting with putting Humpty together again, and we'll do that through starting to look at what are the public interest objectives we have and what are the key issues that we must do, and what are the issues that we might do, and we've already identified some issues that we definitely won't be doing. So all of this, we hope, will address all the wonderful work that's been done in terms of roundtables, research, and the discussion paper of bringing us to improving 240 as a standard and providing guidance to the practitioners out there where appropriate. So can I finish this presentation by thanking the board members most sincerely. Your enthusiasm, your thoughtfulness, your commitment to this topic shines through, and I'm very grateful for the input, and on behalf of the working group, can I thank you all very sincerely. And once again, thanks to the working group and in particular the staff who are not only working on this paper and the outcome of it, but have already got the next one ready for us all for the exciting July meeting. So thanks all very much.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you to the staff for such great preparations. And thank you, it should be noted, to Bev for doing really double duty today on 2 major projects. So huge appreciation to you, Bev, for all the work that you're doing to keep these 2 important projects going. Thank you to the board as well. You know, this is the first time we're sort of doing the research information gathering phase as we're funneling to a project. And so we're searching for ways to ensure debate and then drive into some clear outcomes. I think we found a good rhythm towards the end where I felt like we were getting the issues discussed, but in providing clearer guidance. So I hope you feel that way as well, and always welcome to take input. And any project, any discussion that ultimately includes a nursery rhyme reference has to be a good one, right? So we are on the way to putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. So I'm really glad about that, since that was one of my favorite nursery rhymes as a kid. Anything, I just wanted to ask Michael, from the PIOB perspective, if you have anything you'd like to add on how we're addressing issues on fraud.
I think made good progress during the meeting today. It's good to get some focus on the issues, and I was happy to hear support for strengthening the proposals in some areas and expanding what was going to be looked at. You know, we note that the root cause analysis is underway, and would be quite interested to see what the outcome of that is. That could also help to focus, you know, which areas the standard setting project should focus on. And you know, in the end, we're really hopeful to see a real robust project proposal that's going to make some major strides forward in addressing the fraud issue. You know, it is one, you note that the stakeholders are very interested in, and so you know, ensuring that that gets responded to with some tangible progress forward, I think, is important. You know, if the project just does a few minor things, that's probably not worth the board's effort to undertake it.
Okay, I'd invite anyone else to comment. Any suggestions? I see no hands. Billy, do you have anything you want to prepare us for the next couple of days?
No, I think Tom, Bev and Kai addressed at the start what the board can expect in terms of LCE. So I think that's fine. And then we've got obviously group audits to look forward to for Thursday and Friday, but nothing further than that.
Okay, we reconvene tomorrow at 4 p.m. East Coast time in the US. That's an hour earlier than we started today. We have 2 hours reserved. We'll use as much as required for the topics, but it doesn't necessarily mean we have to use the full 2 hours. Conscious that's been some late nights for everyone based in Europe and South Africa. So apologize for that, but appreciate you sticking with us. And I just want to thank you for a really robust and fruitful conversation today. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. So thank you and have a great rest of the day wherever you are.